Just tell us, how do you think this chip shortage is going to play out? How severe will they be? And when will the supply chain resolve itself?
Yeah, great question. We do think the semiconductor supply shortage will last longer than we hope. Our research indicates that this could last through into 2022. That's primarily a function of what it takes to add supply to the system. So for semiconductors, adding supply is highly complex and quite expensive. And the current capacity has been running, at full capacity since Q3 of 2020. So adding new capacity can take 2 to 3 years. Even adding capacity to current fabs can take up to a year. So even though we're seeing massive investments being announced by the players in the market, as well as governments starting to make big pledges of money to support semiconductors overall, it will just take time, and it will take large amounts of money to add capacity. Our research would indicate that to add just 5 to 10% capacity to current technologies could be up near $40 billion.
Right, and that brings the question then. I think the market and the global economy is learning the hard way of what it means to be too reliant on one country or one company for chips like TSMC, like Samsung. Could we actually see a more diversified supply chain coming out of this? Or do the likes of TSMC and Samsung just have too deep pockets?
Yeah, so the trick is the tech supply chain is just really complex and quite global. China, as we've seen for years, has really viewed semiconductors as a national priority. And now I think we're seeing a lot of other countries starting to do that as well. So you're seeing big announcements from the US, from Europe, Japan, Korea. All countries are talking about how do they add resiliency to their semiconductor supply chain, just given the importance of semiconductors to so many different end markets, auto, consumer electronics. Each part of our economy right now, semiconductors is really a part of. The trick really is that global nature and then the highly complex processes required to manufacture it. And each country needs something a little bit different. So for example, China's been investing a lot over years, but they still need leading edge process technology, as well as the really complex tools required to manufacture these chips. The US, which just made a big announcement on government support, needs more leading edge manufacturing capacity. And then same with Europe. They've made big investments, big pledges to have more leading edge manufacturing capacity as well. Each of these countries, however, are all reliant on a global supply chain for the equipment, the substrates, the rare earths. So it's going to be really hard for any one country to do it on its own. But there is possibility to add more resilience into the system, so we're not quite as reliant on any one player.
Right. And some people are questioning whether there is really a need to pump in hundreds of billions of dollars in an industry that's already profitable. Is there a reason to be concerned, and could it eventually lead to a glut in the industry?
Yeah, it's definitely a concern. Some people are saying semiconductors have been cyclical in the past. What we've seen is semiconductors now are just in so many more end markets. We're seeing just so much demand, across data centers, PCs, automotive, industrials, that are adding more and more of this leading edge content in their semiconductors, that the demand is going to go up. And that cost to build these leading edge factories is going up as well with these, each technology is getting more and more expensive. So if you want to have a more resilient supply chain and not have everything in one location, to encourage that in your country where you might not have as much of the infrastructure already in place, I do think some of these government investments will help broaden that supply base.
We know that this chip war. Go ahead, Yvonne.
I was just asking, the auto industry certainly was the first to get hit. Where do you see the next sector within the technology space that's going to be affected the most?
Yeah, so we definitely saw it with auto first, and we've been talking about that for a while. I think we've really seen it starting to move into the consumer electronic space. So you're seeing announcements from companies like Nintendo, Sony, even Apple, saying some of their new products are going to be delayed, or just the supply of these products will not be what they would like them to be because they're getting these component shortages. And again, I think it all comes back to all of these end markets are sharing the same supply. So while we saw it first with auto, because they actually pushed out some of those orders, it's now hitting kind of across the board.
And we've been talking about how there's intensifying competition in this space. The U.S. is trying to come in a big way. Is it fair to look at it from a point of view of who will win this chip race?
Yeah, well, I think there's lots of players out there trying to win, and I think we can look at it a couple of ways. Staying on Moore's law and continuing to push forward really benefits everybody. Just our use of data, AI. It's so broad based now. The use of leading edge semiconductors. So having multiple players pushing that forward, I think benefits everybody. There's also a lot of companies that sell into semiconductors. So the equipment players, substrates, rare earths, all the chems and gases that go into the manufacturing of these. Those companies, will really have seen, there's unprecedented announcements on the amount of capacity and capital that are going to be put into this industry. So those will definitely be winners. And then overall, having multiple players innovate on the leading edge is just good for all consumers.